Harold Thompson stepped into the cold air of the United National Bank, the large glass doors closing behind him with a faint hiss. The sound echoed through the tall marble lobby like a courtroom slamming shut, but he did not flinch. At 75 years old, Harold had long since learned not to be rattled by things like echoing halls or long lines. His back was a little hunched, his steps careful, but his eyes were sharp and steady. He wore his old army jacket, the one with faded stitching on the shoulders and a pair of silver buttons that had dulled with age. His cap, tilted slightly on his head, still bore the insignia of the 103rd Infantry. It had seen war, snow, mud, and fire. Now it was seeing a bank. Harold was not here to ask for much, just the same thing he came for every month, his pension. The government deposited it into his account like clockwork, and Harold would withdraw, enough to cover his rent, his prescriptions, and a warm plate at the diner 2 blocks over. He did not live with anyone. His wife Mary had passed years ago. His son lived on the other side of the country, busy with his own life. Harold had his books, his corner chair by the window, and the quiet pride of knowing he had served his country with everything he had. The lobby was modestly busy. A few customers waited in line. 2 suited men argued in low voices by the loan desk. The television on the wall ran silent news, showing a stock ticker and smiling anchors with perfect teeth. Harold paid them no mind. He reached the teller window and greeted the young woman with a polite nod. Her name tag read Jessica. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Harold said, placing his ID on the counter with careful hands. "I would like to withdraw $200, please." Jessica smiled as she took the card, but the moment her fingers touched the keyboard, her expression shifted. Her eyes darted back to the screen. She typed again, then paused. "Just a moment, sir," she said, her voice slightly colder. Harold waited, watching her face. She turned the screen slightly away from his line of sight and adjusted her tone. "I am sorry, sir. It appears your account is currently frozen. I cannot release any funds." Harold blinked slowly, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Frozen?" he asked, leaning in just a little. "I believe there must be some error. My pension arrived 2 days ago. I checked the balance yesterday." "I understand," she replied, but her eyes said otherwise. "Unfortunately, the system has flagged the account for suspicious activity. You will need to speak with someone from our upper office team. I will have to ask you to take a seat while I contact them." She handed him back his ID with a thin smile that did not quite reach her eyes. There was no apology, no empathy, just a dismissal. Harold stood still for a moment, as though trying to piece together a puzzle he did not even know he was part of. Suspicious activity? He barely used his card. A few transactions at the pharmacy, groceries, a small donation to a local veterans center last month. He did not own a smartphone. He had no online subscriptions. The most he did was send the occasional check to a church fund for widowed families. Suspicious activity? What could possibly be suspicious about a man who had lived quietly and honestly for decades? He turned slowly and found a seat against the far wall of the lobby, beneath a poster that read, "We value your service." It featured a smiling young man in uniform shaking hands with a banker. Harold looked at it and said nothing. Across the lobby, people moved on with their day. A couple laughed while depositing checks. A middle-aged man paced nervously while waiting for a loan officer. A woman tapped on her phone, not once glancing up. No one seemed to notice Harold. Just another old man with wrinkled hands and a worn jacket. But one security guard did. He stood near the entrance, arms crossed, glancing toward Harold from time to time, as though waiting for something to go wrong. The bench Harold sat on was hard, unwelcoming. He adjusted his coat and looked around. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the cold frustration that had begun to rise in his chest. He had been here before, not in a bank, but in situations where he had to wait for someone in power to decide his fate. He had waited for orders at the edge of a battlefield, waited for news when friends had not returned from patrol, waited for answers from a government that often forgot its soldiers once the uniforms came off. And now, he was waiting again, for a stranger behind a desk to determine whether he would have money for rent or not, whether he could eat tonight or not. He could feel the stares now. A few customers began to glance over. He heard a whisper from a man in line. What did he do? Another murmured, "He looks harmless," as if harmlessness was something to be judged in public spaces. The moments dragged on. He checked his watch. 19 minutes had passed. Still, no one had come. No one had offered an explanation. He had been treated like a warning label. Frozen, flagged, suspicious, without any chance to speak. He leaned forward, hands resting on his cane. He could feel the heat rising behind his eyes, not from anger, but from the quiet pain of being stripped of dignity by bureaucracy. He was not asking for a loan. He was not begging for a favor. He just wanted what was his, earned through sacrifice and paid with the blood and sweat of a younger version of himself who had once run through fields under enemy fire. His thoughts wandered back to Korea. The snow had fallen thick the night of the ambush. He remembered dragging Corporal Jenkins through the mud, bullets raining down, yelling for help that never came. He remembered tying a tourniquet with shaking hands, wrapping his own coat around a soldier who had been hit in the leg. He remembered making it back to base with barely enough strength to speak. And now, all these years later, it was not bullets or bombs that wounded him. It was silence, indifference, a frozen screen behind a bulletproof glass window. Jessica did not look at him again. The security guard now stood a few feet closer, pretending to adjust something on his belt. The tension in the room was subtle, but thick. It was the kind that settles when someone in power assumes you are a problem. Harold adjusted his cap, straightened his jacket, and stared forward. He would not cause a scene. He would not raise his voice. But he would not leave either. He had come here for something he had earned. Something no flag or slogan or glossy brochure could replace. Still, no one came. No one even called his name. He glanced toward the upper floor windows. Behind those glass walls were managers and policymakers, people who had never seen war, who had never gone hungry or lived alone for years with nothing but memories and medicine bottles. People who decided with a click what a man could and could not access. And so, Harold waited. Every minute that passed was a reminder, not of his age, but of how little his service seemed to matter now. The walls were decorated with posters about freedom, gratitude, and honor. But in this room, right now, those words felt like empty wallpaper. And then, quietly, Harold closed his eyes. Just for a moment. He did not sleep. He did not rest. He simply remembered. The feel of the desert wind in his face. The sound of boots on gravel. The letters Mary had written to him during the long nights of watch duty. The time he had pulled a young soldier out from under a burning truck and carried him 3 miles without stopping. He remembered the medals they gave him, the photos they took, the promises they made. He opened his eyes again, and nothing had changed, except now, something had shifted inside him. He had been patient. He had been polite, but he was not going to be forgotten. Not today. Just then, a door creaked open upstairs, and footsteps echoed across the mezzanine. Harold did not look up. Not yet. Because deep down, he knew. This was not over. This was just the beginning. The light above Harold flickered slightly as he sat unmoving, his posture rigid but proud. The dull hum of the bank's fluorescent lights grew louder in his ears, as if echoing the silence around him. Nearly 30 minutes had passed since Jessica, the teller, had told him to wait. No one had returned. Not a single word had been spoken to him. Not a single effort made to resolve the situation. He was invisible. Again. Finally, the sound of heels clacked sharply against the marble floor. A woman stepped through the glass-paneled door from the back offices. She walked with precision, clipboard tucked tightly under one arm, and her phone still clutched in the other. Her blazer was perfectly ironed, and her ID badge swung gently as she moved. Her name read, Lisa Turner, branch manager. She stopped in front of Harold without a smile, without a nod, without a gesture of respect. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked, though her tone suggested the answer did not matter. Harold slowly stood. He adjusted his coat again, took one step closer, to her, and nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She looked down at her clipboard. "We froze your account due to irregular deposits last month. It appears there were 2 payments from sources that did not match your regular activity. The system automatically flagged them, and as per policy, we initiated a hold." Harold narrowed his eyes slightly, confused. "You mean the deposits from the VHF? The Veterans Hope Fund? They helped cover my hearing aid. I spoke with them before applying. They said it would come through the usual way." Lisa did not blink. "Be that as it may, we did not recognize the origin. Therefore, your account remains locked. It may take up to 2 weeks to resolve through our fraud department." 2 weeks. The words landed with the weight of stone. 2 weeks of nothing. No rent, no medication, no groceries. No warm food on cold nights. "I have $20 in my wallet," Harold said quietly. "My landlord expects the rent today. I have lived here in this city for 43 years. I have never once missed a payment. I have never overdrawn my account." Lisa's expression did not soften. "I understand," she said, though she clearly did not. "But I cannot override the system. That is bank protocol." "You cannot, or you will not?" Harold asked, his voice still calm, but laced with something deeper, something weary and raw. She glanced away, clearly annoyed that he had pressed her. "Sir, I would advise you to speak with our fraud department directly. They are not here on site, but they will contact you within 7 to 10 business days." He tried again, holding his ground, his words slow and deliberate. "Miss Turner, I do not need sympathy. I need a decision. I served 30 years. I gave this country everything I had. And now, I just want access to my own money." Lisa sighed, already half turned away. "There is nothing more I can do. Good day, Mr. Thompson." She walked off just like that, Harold stood in place, jaw set, breathing slowly through his nose. The icy sting of dismissal hung in the air. It was not just her words, it was the way she looked at him, like he was a file to close, not a man to understand. Like his presence was an inconvenience to her tightly managed day. The silence in the room thickened. Even customers had begun to watch now. Some stared openly, others glanced, then quickly looked away. But the damage was already done. The man in the worn military jacket with a proud patch on the shoulder had just been reduced to a number flagged by a computer. One woman, holding her young daughter's hand, whispered softly, "That is just not right." Her eyes followed Harold as he slowly returned to his bench and sat down, his shoulders heavy but not slouched. He still sat upright, still proud, but he was tired. He looked down at his hands, rough, weathered, the kind of hands that had built things, lifted others, and fought in places most people would never even see on a map. He looked at the patch on his sleeve, stitched so many years ago. Duty first. He had lived by those words since he was 17. Where was duty now? Was it in the sleek offices above, where policies were written without names or stories attached? Was it behind the locked doors where managers spoke in scripts designed to avoid accountability? Was it in Lisa Turner's voice, calculated, cold, and carefully trained to eliminate human connection? He was about to leave. Not because he accepted the decision, but because there was no one left in the building who would look him in the eye. And then it happened. A voice. Sharp. Unmistakably authoritative. "Did you say Harold Thompson?" The room turned. Heads turned. Even the background noise seemed to stop. A tall man stood near the entrance. He wore a tailored navy suit, but not the stiff kind of corporate fashion. His posture had weight. His movements were intentional. He held a phone to his ear, but his gaze was locked directly on Harold. Lisa, still walking away, paused and turned back, confused. "Yes," she said, a little slower now. "That is correct. There is an account flagged under that name." The man lowered his phone. He took 3 steps forward. "I need access to that account, right now." Jessica, the teller, froze. Lisa blinked twice, clearly uncertain who this man was. Her confidence wavered, just slightly. "I am sorry," she began, but he held up one finger calmly but firmly. "I am Jonathan Reeve, Chief Executive Officer of United National Bank. That man served with my father, saved his life in Korea. I want his account reinstated immediately." The room fell into absolute silence. Lisa's mouth opened slightly. "Sir, I was not aware." "You were not supposed to be aware," he said. "You were supposed to treat him like a human being, like someone who mattered. Instead, you followed a policy that was never meant for someone like Harold Thompson, and you did it without asking a single question." Jessica looked down, her cheeks flushed. Lisa looked stunned. Harold did not move. He did not speak. But something inside him shifted. Not pride, not vindication. Something deeper. Recognition. Someone had remembered. Someone had spoken his name and known who he was. "I served under Colonel Richard Reeve," the CEO continued, "and I have heard his stories. About a young soldier who ran into enemy fire when no one else moved. About a man who dragged 3 wounded boys through the snow while artillery fell around them. About a man who never asked for praise, only peace. Harold slowly stood. Jonathan stepped forward and held out his hand. Firm, steady, not symbolic, not performative, genuine. Harold took it. "I owe you more than I could ever repay," Jonathan said. "And this bank owes you respect. That starts today." He turned to Lisa. "Unfreeze the account, now, and remove the fraud designation. It should never have been flagged in the first place." Lisa nodded, stunned into silence. "Also," Jonathan added, "retrain your staff. Teach them to recognize dignity, especially when it walks through the front door wearing a uniform and asking for nothing but fairness." The CEO walked Harold to the counter himself. As he typed into the system with his own credentials, the screen blinked. The hold vanished. The balance reappeared. Harold looked at the numbers, but he did not smile. He simply nodded, because for the first time in a long while, someone had looked at him and seen more than an old man. They had seen a soldier, a protector, a man who had earned more than the silence he had been given. As he turned to leave, the customers in the lobby stepped aside. Some nodded. Some looked away, ashamed. One young woman clapped quietly. Another man placed a hand over his heart. Harold walked through the glass doors, the sound echoing once again. But this time, it did not feel like a courtroom closing. It felt like a door opening. And he walked out with his head high, the patch on his shoulder catching the sunlight. The quiet hum of the bank returned after a momentary hush, but everything had changed. The people who once looked past Harold Thompson now watched him with a quiet reverence. They had seen something, or rather, someone powerful see him first. And in that act, something profound had shifted. Outside, the sun had broken through the gray sky, casting a warm light through the tall windows. Inside, Harold remained seated beside the man who had just turned the entire room on its head, Stephen Harris. He was not just any executive. He was the chief executive officer of United National Bank. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, shoes polished to a mirror shine, his hair a touch silver at the sides. He carried himself with the kind of gravity that came not from power, but from purpose. Harold looked at him, still unsure what to say. He had spent his entire life avoiding attention, choosing quiet service over recognition. Now this man sat beside him, not as a CEO, not as a superior, but as a son speaking on behalf of a father who never forgot. Stephen leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "I never thought I would meet you," he said, his voice low but steady. "My father spoke of you every single year. On the anniversary, on Veterans Day, at the dinner table when he thought no one was listening. You were the man who saved his life. You were the reason I exist." Harold blinked slowly. He remembered the battle, snow-covered hills, broken radio signals, screams cut short by mortar fire. He remembered the boy, barely 20, who had been hit in the leg and collapsed near a downed tree. He had pulled him out under fire, dragging him inch by inch until they both collapsed in the foxhole, lungs frozen, hands numb, but alive. "I did not know who he was," Harold said. "He was just another soldier who needed help." Stephen smiled. "That is the thing. You never needed to know. You just did it. That is what makes you who you are." The branch manager, Lisa Turner, had returned, standing awkwardly to the side with several papers in her hand. Her face was pale now, drained of the aloof confidence she had earlier. She cleared her throat. attempting to keep her voice from shaking. "Mr. Thompson, I have officially reinstated your account. The fraud alert has been removed. Here is a printed statement showing the update and full balance. I also took the liberty of issuing an apology in writing." Harold took the paper but did not say much. He glanced at Stephen, then tucked it gently into his coat pocket. Stephen turned to her, his tone firmer now. "And your report on this incident will be on my desk before close of business today. I want every detail, how it happened, who flagged it, why no one followed up. Do not make this mistake again." "Yes, sir," Lisa said quickly. Jessica, the young teller who had first spoken to Harold, approached with an envelope in hand. "This is the full cash amount from your account, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice soft, respectful. "I also waived the withdrawal fee." Harold accepted the envelope but looked directly at her. "You were kind to me. I remember that. Thank you." Jessica looked down, nodding. Her eyes were glassy. Stephen stood now. The room once again quieted. He turned to face the remaining customers, who were still watching, still processing what had just unfolded in front of them. "This man," Stephen said, "is a hero. He saved my father. Without him, I would not be standing here. And yet today, he was treated like a problem, a security flag, a risk." He looked around the room, voice steady and powerful. "There are many Harold Thompsons in this country, men and women who gave everything and asked for nothing. We will not treat them like they are invisible. Not anymore. Not under my leadership." There was a long pause. No one spoke. No one moved. And then, softly, a clap echoed from the back of the room. A young man in a gray hoodie, maybe in his 20s, stood up and applauded once, then again, then more confidently. Others followed. Soon nearly everyone was clapping, not out of obligation but out of something deeper: gratitude, humility, awareness. Harold did not ask for it. He did not crave the recognition. But in that moment, standing quietly beside the man whose life had been shaped by a single act of bravery decades ago, he felt something he had not felt in years. Seen. Stephen placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. "I would like to offer you something," he said gently. "We have a position on our board, an honorary seat for community veterans. It is ceremonial, but your input would matter. I want your voice in our meetings, your wisdom." Harold was quiet for a moment. "You want me to sit at the table?" he asked slowly. Stephen nodded. "Yes, and not just because you saved my father, but because your kind of integrity is rare, and this institution needs more of it." Harold nodded almost imperceptibly. He was not smiling, not quite, but there was something softer in his eyes now. A weight had lifted. As the two men began to walk toward the door, the bank lobby remained still. No one tried to get back in line. No one resumed their business. The story unfolding before them had become something bigger than banking. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. The flag across the street waved proudly in the breeze. Stephen held the door open for Harold, a small but deeply symbolic gesture. "You know," he said, "when I was a boy, my father kept an old, scratched photo on his desk. 3 soldiers covered in snow, one of them holding another's arm as they stumbled through the dark. He said that was the moment his life was spared." Harold nodded. "That photo," Stephen continued, "is why I joined the bank. I wanted to build something that helped people. Somewhere along the way, we forgot what that meant. Today, you reminded me. Harold placed a hand on Stephen's shoulder, firm and steady. "You are a good man," he said. "Make sure your people know what good looks like. Teach them." "I will," Stephen replied. "I promise." And with that, the two men stepped out into the sunlight, side by side. People passing on the street glanced at them curiously, unaware of the history walking past. But inside the bank, the staff and customers remained still for a long moment, silently changed by what they had witnessed. It was not just the CEO's power that had shaken the room. It was Harold's presence, a quiet man with a steady heart. A veteran who never demanded honor but lived a life worthy of it. And now, finally, the world had paused long enough to recognize him. The sun was lower in the sky by the time Harold stepped out of the bank's glass doors. The air had shifted, no longer heavy with embarrassment, but light with something else: dignity. He held no trophies, no medals, no loud fanfare. But in his hands was something far more important. His dignity had been returned, quietly, respectfully, without a single demand. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. Tucked into the inside pocket of his coat was a freshly printed card. Thick, expensive stock, bearing the name of Stephen Harris himself. Not just the title of CEO, but a handwritten note on the back. "Anything you need ever, just call me." It was not boastful. It was not grand. It was personal. It was real. Alongside it was a folded letter guaranteeing Harold's account security for life, with a dedicated personal banker assigned solely to him. Not because he was wealthy, not because he was loud, but because he mattered. The same branch manager who had humiliated him earlier that day was no longer standing behind the counter. Word had spread swiftly within corporate. She had been relieved of duty within hours. The email, while not public, had used words like failure and judgment and lack of compassion. Harold did not ask for that outcome. He had not even mentioned her name to Stephen. But some actions echo louder than words, and hers had. Still, none of that is what Harold carried home in his heart. Not the reinstated account, not the public apology, not even the offers of honorary board seats or private banking. What mattered to Harold was something most could not see. It was the quiet confirmation that the battles he had once fought, mud-caked, bullet-ridden, thousands of miles from home, had not vanished into forgotten dust. That someone still remembered, that someone still cared, that his name, his sacrifices, his principles still held weight in a world so often distracted by speed, convenience, and surface impressions. Later that afternoon, someone uploaded the incident to social media. It had been captured by a bystander, an older gentleman who happened to be in the bank at the time and had started filming once the CEO entered. The clip was raw, shaky at times, but what it captured struck a nerve across the internet. The video showed Harold being treated dismissively. Then the moment Stephen Harris arrived and everything changed. His name, spoken with reverence. The silence that followed. The applause. The weight of history unfolding in a quiet bank branch on a nondescript street. The video's title read simply, "Old Veteran Humiliated. CEO Restores His Dignity." It spread like wildfire. Within a few hours, it had gathered hundreds of views, thousands of views. By the next morning, millions. Comments poured in. Some from young people who had never met a veteran in their lives, writing, "Thank you, sir, for your service." Others condemned the bank for its original treatment of Harold, calling for better training, more awareness. A few dug up Stephen Harris's background and discovered his late father had been a decorated war hero. And suddenly the connection clicked for everyone watching. Yet Harold never watched the video. Not once. He heard about it, his neighbor told him, then his pastor, then his mailman. But Harold had no interest in going viral. He had no hunger for fame. The spotlight had never called to him, not even in the quiet aftermath of battles won. Instead, he did what he always did when he needed to find balance. He walked a few doors down from the bank, entered the little diner he had visited for the last 20 years, and sat at the same booth by the window. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with bright eyes and a ponytail, greeted him with a different tone this time. "I saw the video," she said, setting down a glass of water. "Everyone's talking about it." Harold nodded gently. "I just wanted a sandwich," she smiled. "Coming right up, hero." As he waited, Harold stared out the window. The street had not changed. Same traffic lights, same crosswalks. But something inside him had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet realignment of pride. Not arrogance, never that. Just the kind of self-respect that rises when the world finally looks up and says, "We see you." When the food came, he ate slowly. No rush. He savored every bite. Then, when the check arrived, he placed a folded 20 beneath it and stood. A tip far larger than usual. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Because someone, somewhere, might need a small reminder that kindness still lived in the quiet corners of this world. As he was pulling his coat back on, a small voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir?" Harold turned. A young boy stood beside the table. Could not have been older than 8 or 9. Curly hair. Backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. "My grandpa saw that video," the boy said. "He said you are a real hero." Harold froze. His throat tightened. He knelt down slowly so they were eye level. "What is your grandpa's name?" "Leon. Leon Carter. He said he was in the same unit as you. Way back." Harold's eyebrows lifted. The name rang a distant bell. Carter. Yes, that young private who used to hum old blues tunes while they cleaned their rifles in the freezing cold. He had survived, had made it home. "Tell your grandpa," Harold said softly, "that I remember him, and thank him, and tell him I said he is the real hero." The boy smiled wide, then hugged Harold without hesitation. In that moment, time seemed to fold. Here was a child, untouched by war, untouched by judgment, untouched by politics or policies. Just a child who saw goodness and responded with something real, pure. When Harold stood again, he felt something unexpected. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the world was not as far gone as it sometimes felt. That in between the noise, the headlines, the rush, there was still space for reverence, for gratitude, for the quiet power of doing the right thing. In the weeks that followed, Harold received letters, handwritten ones, from strangers across the country. Some were veterans. Others were children in classrooms who had watched the clip as part of a lesson on service. A high school history teacher in Ohio even called it The most real example of living history I have ever shown my students. Stephen Harris kept his promise. Every week, Harold received a call from his assigned banker, just to check in, not to sell anything. The bank sent a formal invitation for Harold to attend their annual leadership summit as a guest of honor. He politely declined. Crowds were never his thing. But he sent a note of thanks handwritten in his perfect block letters. And every Friday afternoon without fail, Harold returned to the diner. Same booth, same sandwich, same routine. But the greetings were different now. "Thank you for your service, sir. You're the man from the video, right? My father was a Marine. He would have loved to meet you." Harold never let it go to his head. He smiled, nodded, spoke when spoken to, and kept his steps measured and humble. But each time he left the diner, there was a different bounce in his walk. Not because he had gone viral, but because after all those years, someone finally said his name with honor. The same name that had once been on a dog tag, buried under layers of camouflage and silence. The same name that had almost been erased by a cold transaction screen and a suspicious glance. Now, it lived again. In boardrooms, in school essays, in whispered stories across dinner tables, and in the quiet heart of a boy who had heard from his grandpa about a man named Harold Thompson, the man who never asked for recognition, but finally, received it.